And if you missed it, we spent quite a bit of time. Well, we spent about the last 10 minutes of the show yesterday talking about leverage. We had a question come in just asking, what is leverage? One of my favorite DFS concepts to talk about. So I was a little bit jammed for time. I tried to pack as much as I could into the last 10 minutes, and it sounds like it was helpful for you guys. But Shiver Me Ginger wanted me to expand on this a little bit today, and he asked this question. In office hours, you talked about the leverage section as an example of, say, 9-game slates, 5 stacks win 20% of the time. I've seen RG have slate IQ stuff on the past on this. What would be the best way to go and analyze this type of stuff, if it would even be possible? I've seen in last NFL season where 2-1 or 2-2 stacks have X win percent success and the field has Y, so going over or under provides leverage. Yeah, so this is kind of a summary of how I defined leverage yesterday. If you missed it, I recommend going and checking it out. It is one of the last questions I took on in yesterday's show, so it'll be at kind of the bottom of the timestamp list. But basically what I said is I defined it as the field inefficiently assessing the win percentage of a certain player or lineup or roster construction, which is really what Shiver Me Ginger is getting at here. Basically, I think this is the exact example I used yesterday. Maybe a 5-stack wins 20% of the time on a certain slate, or that's the optimal roster construction, but the field only uses it 10% of the time. There is leverage by going over the field on that particular construction, right? So what I see in this question really is like, okay, great. That's awesome theory. Now, what can I really do with this? And this is actually, kind of an interesting ongoing problem space in DFS, and I think it's a hard problem to solve. It's not exactly hard to solve the question of how much is the field going to do something. I think we handle that pretty well. The question, I think, where it gets very difficult is what is the optimal ownership, or what's the exact amount of time that a certain construction or player or lineup ends up being the optimal one, or the successful one, or the highest EV one. And that's a difficult problem. I think the easiest way to immediately add value to your process when you're thinking about leverage is to do it in a more intuitive way. So let me go ahead and pull up SaberSim here. And just talk about a couple things here. I don't want to... I want to make this as useful, because I know yesterday I stayed a little more theoretical, and I want to make sure we're staying practical here. I think one thing's important to remember is that I mentioned yesterday that blindly fading ownership is not leverage, but by the way our ownership fade slider works, by telling the builder to take into account ownership when we're building lineups, we do naturally get a little bit of the effect of leverage into our builds, right? We're essentially, when we run a build, we're saying, consider the impacts of correlation and the correlation coefficients between players. Look at the real ranges of outcomes of players based on their sims and their smart diversity, and consider the ownership and give me the best, highest EV lineups possible, right? So there are a lot of different players that are going to be highly owned on any given slate, but the use of the ownership fade slider here is going to basically force the builder to make tough decisions about where the ownership is best. So I think we get a lot of this out of the box already. I think this is an opportunity to add a little bit of additional value. And I think one way you can do that here, when we're talking about leverage, let me just run a test build here, is to continue, one of the trends I talked about yesterday is looking at this from the standpoint of what is the fail condition of a popular play, right? We often think about what is the success condition of a certain lineup construction, right? And that comes into play with stacking, right? Like, what is the success condition of a lineup that you have a 5-stack, right, of a certain team? Well, it's that entire team hitting a ceiling outcome, and it's correlated, and that builds on itself. And there's a bit of a story that's told there, right? When this team scores 12 runs, I have 5 pieces from that team. But I don't think we always consider the negative condition. And I'll show you kind of what I mean. So let's go ahead and look at our pitchers here. We just ran a test build of 20 lineups. And I'm going to say show all players. I want to see every player in the pool. And I want to look at maybe some highly owned pitchers that maybe we're underweight on, right? So we are underweight on Kevin Gausman here. I'm going to, and he's expected to be the second chalkiest pitcher on the slate. We are overweight on Brandon Woodruff, right? This is kind of what I mean by the builder's going to naturally lead you to some leverage opportunities out of the gate, right? We are forcing the builder to make decisions about highly owned pitchers, and it is overweight on Brandon Woodruff, implying that maybe the field is undervaluing him even as the highest projected owned pitcher on the slate. And we're underweight on most of these next few guys, right? You can see kind of the statement unfolding here. The field is improperly assuming that the top 5 or so pitchers on the slate are all close in value, and our model believes that Woodruff is far and away the best option, and it correlates with what we see in the projections. It makes a lot of sense, right? But let's go ahead and look at this here. If the implication is that the field is overvaluing Kevin Gausman and we are coming in underweight, one way we can do this here is, let's just cross him off completely here for the purposes of example, is what's the fail condition for Kevin Gausman, right, when we fade him? Maybe it's that he's just not one of the top 2 pitchers, but maybe it's that he gets lit up by the Dodgers, right? It's a good hitting team already. If the field is overweighting Gausman, it is likely that they are also underweighting the Dodgers. One thing we can do here, and the builder may already do it, okay, so it hasn't, is then give ourselves some access to the team that stands to gain the most when Gausman fails, and that's the Dodgers. So we can do that by pulling up our batters. We're still showing all players. Sort by team. Go find some Dodgers bats. So we do have one lineup with Will Smith. Maybe what we go ahead and do is say that we want 20% of our lineups to have Dodger stacks. So let's go ahead and add 20%. Maybe let's do 20% Mookie and see what happens. It might not like that much. Yeah, it doesn't have enough lineups built that way already. Let's see if I can add just a few of these guys. Surely we don't even have any Dodger stacks. So I don't have enough lineups for this, unfortunately. Let's see if I can just bump up some Will Smith maybe and just start seeing if I can get some stacks here. Yeah, it really didn't want to build any Dodger stacks for me. So maybe this didn't end up being the best example. But the point I'm making here is that we can make, okay, now we might have some Dodger stacks. Yes, we do. Okay, so now let's say we want 20% total Dodger stacks. And let's get rid of our exposure limits on the actual individual players. So that it can just build us whatever ones it wants. Okay, it doesn't even have that many Dodger stacks in the lineup. I guess my point here is that the original question came through of like, how is the best way to use this definition of leverage and analyze it? And I think you can get very hung up on trying to come up with calculations. There's a way to do this, right? There's a classic like 4for4 article that was written a few years ago about calculating leverage scores. And I think you can kind of get hung up, at least for the way I think about this, on going through and doing a very analytical approach to leverage, and instead being aware of the definition and what it means, right? It's about market efficiencies of the way the field is assessing the best plays, and it's about taking advantage of what the conditions for success and the conditions for failure of certain players are. We can use this to be kind of intuitive about our approach on a slate, right? And this would be one way to do it. In this example, the builder clearly really doesn't want to use Dodgers. So if I wanted to get some Dodgers, maybe what I would need to go is go back and bump up their team projection a bit, or add a manual stacking rule to force some of them into my lineups. Either of those would work with the condition that I had already decided to fade Gausman, right? That's the fail condition there. So I noted you mentioned the Slate IQ stuff. I've seen some of that too. I think the one thing you need to be very careful of there is there are similarities in certain slates, right? Obviously, we use default sliders, and when we say these are our default sliders for 15-game slates, we are making a general assumption that 15-game slates are similar enough that we can do that, right? And I think that mostly works. The one thing to be careful of with these, anytime someone's giving you actual like leverage values of a certain player or stack or team, it's important to know where that number is coming from. And you have to be careful with the problem of sample size, right? I know that Slate IQ article in particular, I think it's an interesting one. It's using what is described as the 25 most similar past slates. And that is a difficult thing to assess, right? How I think I find it hard to know. Every slate is kind of its own puzzle in its own unique way. And while one slate may bear similarities to another, and you may be able to learn something about maybe the way the field interacts with 15-game slates, I don't know if you can use 25 previous slates and come up with a judgment call about where you might find leverage on the current slate. That's just me personally, but yeah, anyway, I think this has been an interesting discussion we've kind of been having on and off the last couple days. If anyone has any questions about that, let me know. I'm happy to continue talking about this. I find leverage really interesting. I think on a slate-to-slate basis, we can continue to talk about different ways you can find it. I think there's probably maybe a budding strategy session here at some point talking about this a little more. If you've been sitting here listening to me talk for the last 10 minutes and you have no idea what I'm talking about at all, I'd recommend going back and checking out yesterday's kind of final segment where I talked a little bit about leverage. I defined these things a little bit more from the beginning here. That will probably help to catch you up. So yeah, I guess in summary, I think we can use that definition of leverage that we now know and recognize, one, that the ownership fade slider is going to help us get some of the way there because we force it to make decisions about where the field is well assessing value and where it isn't. But from there, we can make minor adjustments in our projections or our exposures to emphasize plays that provide us relative edge over the field. Because they're taking advantage of market inefficiencies. Yeah. So